Hello plant lovers, Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you in fact to our living room because we have a bit of a plant rescue special. But first, I post every week about growing cold, cool, intermediate orchids and unusual plants here in Melbourne. So do hit subscribe if that's of any interest to you and you can see what I'm up to. So yes, herein lies a story, plant lovers. Now, I made a video about how to start growing your orchid collection, what sort of plants to buy, what sizes, where to get them from, etc., etc., and what should happen the following week. But I see a lovely lady had advertised on Facebook Marketplace, orchids. Always strikes a frisson of delight in my heart because generally that means that the person doesn't know what they are and you also don't know what you might be looking at. There were two orchids there. I'm going to save the other one for another video, but this one I hadn't actually seen on her listing. It was just in her garden along with the mother plant that was in bloom, and it is a Zygopetalum. And the reason I'm in the kitchen is because that is a man's place, but I am going to repot it, and I thought what I might do is just video it because I don't know what lurks beneath. But there are issues with this orchid, as with the best of us, so I thought it might be a good idea just to go through it all and give you an idea of what I'm looking at and what we might find underneath. So I'm just going to give you some basics first of all. I only know it's a Zygopetalum because the mother plant was in bloom and I could see the flower, and it's pretty classic, no ID, but when mine blooms I'll be able to hopefully give it a specific ID. But nonetheless, it was a very lovely one and it caught my eye. And this, plant lovers, was $10. Now look at the size of that. There is a lot of pseudobulb action going on there. I would say, although this is a division, it's almost a specimen plant because it's so big. The thing that struck me though is that there are several new growths coming through. So clearly it's reasonably healthy, but let's just have a look at those leaves. You see the color is very limey. Now the lady I bought this from had it just sitting outdoors. It was in a little bit of shelter, but it was getting a lot of direct sun. And as you can see, you see the speckling on these leaves, and there's actually some brown marks down here in the pseudobulbs as well. So one of the things I think we can see from the color of the foliage is that this baby was getting too much light. And as an Australian who has had sun damage and melanoma, I can attest to the fact that that's not nice. So we're going to have a look at that. Its final resting place with me is going to have much more filtered and indirect light because Zygopetalums do not like direct sun unless it's early morning gentle sunlight. So that's the first thing. The next thing is it's in a plastic pot. That's okay, but you know that I am a terracotta pot kind of guy. I don't have them here, but I'll show you the pot options that I've got. So I'm going to repot it. The other thing is that the lady I bought it from has just potted it in generic potting mix, terrestrial plant potting mix. So I would hazard a guess then that the roots are perhaps not in the greatest condition, that this is a terrestrial soil mix and it's going to be very compacted and probably too damp. So I'm going to pot it in a much lighter, more aerated orchid suitable mix. But here's the thing though, plant lovers, this has been sitting happily under this lady's tree for years, as has the mother plant, and it blooms every year under really inhospitable conditions. It's getting too much light, it's probably getting a little too much water, and it is in regular potting mix. Just goes to show you, plant lovers, how tough some orchids can be, and that we can perhaps dial down our obsession about getting everything perfect, because often orchids are really tough, and this is a case in point. Okay, well, I'm going to take some close-ups of this before I unpot it, and then we'll see what the root system's like, and then also gauge what size pot it needs, because this is a fairly wide pot. It might be too big, so we'll just see what the roots are like and what it's telling me it needs. Okay, let's get to it. First of all, tools. Here is my magic dibber, which I just love, and my sensational Japanese secateurs. And the first thing to do is, of course, clean them with rubbing alcohol, because you do not know A, what might be in here, and B, what might be on your secateurs. So you don't want to spread any undue love, as they say. There we go. Now we are ready to see what lies beneath. Now the first issue I think is the fact that this is a plastic pot, which is okay, but it has a drainer. Now this soil is a terrestrial pot plant soil, so it's going to retain a lot of moisture, and then it's sitting in a dish. So you can imagine that this soil is going to stay pretty damp, which is not a great outcome for the orchid. Anyway, let's have a look. Okie doke. Oh, out it comes. Oh my goodness me. Well, well, well. Let's get rid of this offending pot. How healthy is that? Wow. Well, I'm really excited, really excited. But you can see, look, these are all pine needles that have settled in the top. Anyway, that, plant lovers, is a very healthy root system. So we've got no concerns there. I might just loosen off a little bit of this medium using my magic dibber. Do you see how dense all this soil is? Heavens. But it is quite amazing that the orchid has got such great roots. Just goes to show once again how resilient orchids can be. And I think in their natural environment, orchids aren't grown in a mix of perlite and charcoal and bark. They kind of are very opportunistic growers. So I think it's important to remember that as well. Ah, look, you can see as we're getting inside that some of these roots are mushy and are definitely too damp. It's the roots on the outside that seem the healthiest. So there might be a bit of trimming. Ah, yes, you see there is some rotting, squishy roots, not viable. In fact, lots of these aren't, but never mind. Lots of them are, so that is still very positive. Let's keep going. This is literally, I think, garden soil. I'm trying not to damage the roots as well, because a lot of them are in great condition, but as you can see, some of the ones in the core, like here, are very mushy and rotten. So it's going to be quite difficult to get at them, I'm afraid, but we'll do our best. I think we can trim off some of these as we go. Get that one off. I'm keen to try and get as much of this out as I can without going too crazy, because it's very damp in there. And there are a lot of these mushy roots. I always wanted to be an archaeologist when I was a child, so here we are. I feel like I'm unearthing Pompeii. All right, I'm just going to go and give it a little bit of a rinse now, and we'll see what else comes off. Okay, well, the consensus is that these roots are in generally pretty great condition, considering the orchid has been outdoors in the weather in regular plant potting mix. So I am really happy about that. I can see that that one is squished and rotting, so let's get rid of that from the base. But look at all those roots. Generally lots of incredibly healthy new root growth. I've done as much as I can to get out the old and rotting roots from in the center of the plant, but I don't want to go too crazy in there. Oh my goodness. Because I don't want to damage all those new roots, so it's going to have to be a little bit of live and let live, I'm afraid, as far as some of that matter is concerned. Here is our plant, and as you can see, the size of those roots are quite considerable, so it is going to be my bigger pot alternative. Okay, plant lovers, this is the size terracotta pot I'm going to go for, because the root system is so huge, it is just about going to fit in there. Now, you know I love terracotta because it evaporates. It doesn't hold water for that long, so it does keep the roots of the orchid relatively dry, as compared to this pot retained a lot of moisture and was very wet. As we can see, the medium attached to the roots was very wet, and it has caused a bit of root rot, but never mind. This is what I'm going to go for now. Luckily, I had this pot to hand. Okie doke. Let's have a look at this. It looks like the most wonderful granola recipe. What I always use is an orchid bark mix. I've got a bit of shell grit here. Shell grit is full of calcium, and the mycorrhizal fungi that I'm going to put in here enables the plant to access some of that calcium. So that's one little trick of the trade. Here is just some loose charcoal, some perlite, and then some sphagnum moss just to line the bottom of the pot. So I'm just going to make a mix of this. Let's put some medium in the bottom firstly. Put a little bit of charcoal in there, a bit of perlite. Okay, now for some secret ingredients. Firstly, this is just a generic slow release fertilizer, and I'm literally, because it's quite a large plant and it needs a bit of help, just putting a little handful of grains into the mix like that. And then the next thing is mycorrhizal fungi. and you just put a little soupçon in there, the same amount that you would put in of cayenne pepper into a spice dish. So this is such a tired old packet you can't see the brand, but you can Google it. Mycorrhizal fungi has a symbiotic relationship with the roots of a plant, and it enables them to draw the nutrients out of the soil. It makes the nutrients available to the plant. So it is a very useful thing. Can't harm the plant, it can only help it, and it helps develop a healthy root system, which is great if you've got a plant that might be struggling, or if you've got a plant that you've bought perhaps online and the roots were in really bad condition or non-existent. Okay, can we get this in? My goodness, it only just fits. I'm now going to top it up with more medium. Let's just give that a nice mix. All right. Now it's got quite a dense root system, so I do want to try and make sure as much of that medium gets into those root cavities as is possible. So there's no need to pack it down, because what you don't want is the medium to be really dense around the roots. You want it to be light. So unlike potting a sort of a regular house plant, you don't need to really push down. Just try and ease it into those little gaps where the roots are, so that we have as much medium as we can get going into all those spaces and cavities. There we are. I think our work is done. And then the last step is just to give it a little bit of a water. To water it in, I'm going to give it a little diluted watering with sea salt. This is the brand I use, but you can use anything really. Any liquid-based fertilizer. This one is seaweed-based. It's not too strong. It's sort of more like a tonic than anything. And I literally just put a tiny splash. So that is literally just a drop, maybe a quarter of a teaspoon into a small watering can like this. There are always the instructions on the back. With this sort of fertilizer though, you generally can't overdo it because it's soluble and it will pass through, but I always try to err on the side of less than more. So I'm just going to water that in to give all of that sphagnum moss a good drenching as well. And all the way around, there we go. Not getting the pseudo bulbs wet, but just wetting all of the medium. A good watering. Now I wouldn't normally water it as much as that, but you know, it's just been through a little bit of stress. So let's let that drain and take it out to its new home. There we are, plant lovers, Zygopetalum rescue. I feel like it's a pet rescue program, but look, I think it's already looking healthier, don't you? I think the leaves are already looking a nicer green. So the thing is with orchids, the leaf color does often give you an indication of the general health and well-being. So this one, as we can see, has got these black bits, which are sun damage, as it was outside in someone's garden getting a lot of direct sun throughout the day. And the leaves are very limey. Now they shouldn't be dark green, but they shouldn't be as limey as this. So you can see that the new growths are kind of the sort of green that you want to go towards. They haven't yet been sort of damaged by being overexposed to sun because they're still fairly new. But anyway, so yes, it needs to be a few shades darker, but not super dark. If it is very dark, it means it's not getting enough light. The Zygopetalums are cool, cold tolerant here in Melbourne, which is where I am. So this baby is going to live outside all year. It's going to get filtered but quite bright light, and it's going to get a little bit of direct morning sunlight, but only for about half an hour, 40 minutes, so not a huge amount of direct light, and it's very gentle in the morning. After that, gentle dispersed light. And there we go. So there are 3 new growth spikes coming up, and then there are 3 sort of more established growths there. Of course, it might well be the case that one of those is a flower spike, so watch this space, plant lovers, because if it does, obviously I will make a video about it. But anyway, there we go. I have increased my orchid collection for the princely sum of $10 for a very, very large and relatively healthy plant that may or may not have flower spikes, but nonetheless it's got lots of vegetative growth coming, which is always a good sign. So let's watch this space. I'll keep you up to date with its journey as it heads towards blooming, hopefully, and then we'll be able to name it. So that's very exciting. Thank you, plant lovers. Thanks for watching. I hope this has been of some use to you in your journey of orchid growing, and I look forward to seeing you next week with whatever adventure I might conjure up. See you then.